She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just stood in the middle of that dusty auction square with her chin up and her hands shaking at her sides while men argued over what she was worth. That silence, that terrible dignified silence, was what made Ethan Walker stop walking. He had come to town for flour and salt. He left with something he hadn't planned on a wife, and a rage he couldn't put out. If this story moves you, subscribe and drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this ride reaches. The morning Abigail Carter was put up for debt payment, the sun was already brutal. It was the kind of July heat that made the air above the dirt road shimmer and twist, that turned every breath into something you had to work for. The mining town of Caldwell Flats had never been a gentle place. It had been carved out of the earth, the same way the men who lived there had carved out their lives with force, with desperation, and without much regard for what got left behind in the process. Abigail stood in front of Royce Dunbar's mercantile, with her wrists tied in front of her with a length of rough rope. She was 23 years old. She had brown hair she kept pinned back because loose hair felt careless to her, and she had her mother's eyes gray level, the kind that looked at a thing and saw it plainly. She was wearing the same dress she'd slept in because her uncle had not given her time to change. Her uncle Gerald Carter stood 3 feet to her left and was sweating through his collar. "Now, Royce," Gerald was saying, his voice carrying that particular slick quality it always had when he was frightened. "I said I'd have the money by Friday. You know I'm good for it. I've always been good for it." Royce Dunbar leaned against his doorframe and picked something from his teeth with a small bone-handled knife. He was a wide man, not tall, with a face that looked like it had been pressed too hard against a wall at some formative age. His eyes moved from Gerald to Abigail and stayed there. "You've told me you were good for it 4 times in the past 3 months, Gerald. I've been patient." He paused. "I am no longer patient. I just need until Friday." "What I need," Royce said, cutting him off with the ease of a man who rarely raised his voice because he didn't have to, "is collateral. You put the girl up yourself. Last Tuesday. You sat in my card room and you said, and I will quote you directly, 'I've got a niece who's worth something. Take her if I lose.' You lost." He looked at Abigail. "So here we are." Abigail did not look at her uncle. She had spent the past several hours deciding not to look at him, because if she did, she was afraid of what her face might do, what her voice might do. She had cried once already that morning in the small back room where they'd kept her, and she had decided that was the last of it. She was not going to cry in front of Royce Dunbar, and she was not going to beg. She was also not going to make this easy. "I'm not a piece of property," she said. Her voice was calm. She had worked to make it calm. Royce's eyes moved to her slowly, the way a man looks at something that has unexpectedly made a noise. "Ma'am," he said almost gently, "I'm afraid that in this particular situation, the legality of it is fairly clear. Your uncle used you as collateral on a debt. The debt was not paid. I have witnesses and a signed agreement." He tapped his breast pocket. "I don't want trouble with you. I just want what I'm owed." "What you're owed," Abigail said, "is $400, not a person." "What I'm owed," Royce said, and his voice took on a faint edge for the first time, "is whatever Gerald Carter put on the table. And Gerald Carter put you on the table." He pushed off the doorframe and stood up straight. "Now, I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to arrange suitable terms of employment. You'll work off the debt in my boarding house. There are women who've done it. It's honest work." Several men had drifted close without making a show of it, leaning on posts, standing near water troughs. The way men in small towns always gathered around trouble without ever admitting they were watching. Abigail looked at the men. She looked at her uncle, who was staring at the dirt. Then she looked back at Royce. "Honest work," she repeated. "That's right. In your boarding house." Royce said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Abigail's hands were shaking. They had been shaking since before dawn. She kept them still by pressing them together one against the other through the rope. "My uncle's debt is not my debt," she said. "I signed nothing. I agreed to nothing. And I will not—" "Miss Carter." Royce's voice went flat. Done with patience now. Done with the performance of reasonableness. I suggest you lower your voice. I suggest, said a voice from behind the small crowd, you take your hands off that rope. Chatamam. Nobody had seen the man arrive. That was the first thing people would say later in the days when Caldwell Flats was still working out what exactly had happened in front of Royce Dunbar's Mercantile on that July morning. He'd simply been there the way a boulder is simply in the middle of a river, as if it had always been there, and you'd just failed to notice it. Ethan Walker was 38 years old, and he had the look of a man who spent most of his life at altitude. Not tall the way some men were tall for show, but built like something that had been tested repeatedly by weather and work, and had simply refused to fail. He wore a gray hat that had been excellent once, and was now just functional. His jacket was open, his hands were loose at his sides. He walked through the small crowd the way water moves through cracks, not with aggression, but with an absolute certainty that he would get through regardless. He stopped when he was close enough for Royce to see his eyes clearly. I said, Ethan repeated with the particular quiet of a man who doesn't feel the need to escalate, take your hands off that rope. Royce looked at him for a long moment. He was measuring the way men like Royce always measured. Looking for weakness. Looking for the performance of toughness underneath the real thing. He didn't find weakness. Friend, Royce said carefully, this is a private business matter. I'd encourage you to step away. I don't know you well enough to be your friend. Ethan's eyes moved briefly to Abigail, not in assessment, not the way the other men had looked at her, but in the way a man checks a situation for facts. Then back to Royce. What's the debt? That is not. What's the debt? A long pause. Around them the street had gotten very quiet. Someone's horse shifted weight, and the sound of it was loud. $400? Royce said. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He came out with a leather pouch, and he set it on the edge of the Mercantile's porch railing between himself and Royce. Count it, he said. Royce stared at the pouch. Gerald Carter made a small noise that might have been relief, or might have been greed. It was hard to tell with Gerald, they were similar sounds. Now hold on, Gerald started. I'm not talking to you, Ethan said without looking at him. Royce opened the pouch. He counted. His jaw moved slightly the way jaws do when a man is calculating whether he is currently winning or losing. He was not winning. This is 420, Royce said. The extra 20 is for the rope, Ethan said. Cut her loose. The crowd was very still. Royce looked up from the pouch, and what was in his eyes now was not reasonable and not patient. It was something older and uglier, the thing that had always been underneath the performance of civil commerce. You don't know what you're buying into, Royce said softly. This ain't just about the debt. Cut, Ethan said. Her loose. Royce nodded at one of his men. The rope was cut. Abigail felt the pressure release, and she had to breathe deliberately in then out to keep her knees from doing something embarrassing. She pressed her wrists together, one thumb over the red mark the rope had left, and she did not look grateful, and she did not look relieved. She looked at Royce Dunbar the way her gray eyes looked at everything plainly and with full attention. This doesn't settle things, Royce said. He was talking to Ethan, but he wasn't looking away from Abigail. That's something you should know. Noted, Ethan said. He turned to Abigail then, and he looked at her straight, and it was such a relief after hours of being looked at sideways, assessed and categorized, that she nearly said something foolish. Instead, she held still. Ma'am, he said, I'm Ethan Walker. I've got horses and a camp north of town. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking if you want to walk away from here under your own power. Abigail looked at him. She looked at the crowd. She looked at her Uncle Gerald, who was now carefully examining a nail in the wall of the Mercantile. What are the terms? She said. Something moved in Ethan's expression. Not quite surprise, but close to it. The terms, he said, are that you're free. That's it. People don't pay $400 for no terms. I do. He held her gaze steadily, "You don't owe me anything, Miss Carter. But you standing here gives Dunbar something to grab onto legally or otherwise. If you want to walk out of his reach, I can help you do that. That's all this is." Abigail thought about it. It was not a long think. She was a practical woman, and the practicalities here were fairly clear. Royce Dunbar was not going to let this go because some bills had changed hands. He had said as much. The man in front of her was an unknown quantity, but he had walked through a crowd on her behalf without being asked to, and he had asked for nothing, and he was looking at her like a person. That last thing, she realized, was the rarest thing in this town. "All right," she said. "Take." What neither of them had counted on was Royce. Or rather, what Royce's man had seen while the crowd was distracted by the business of the pouch and the rope. What Royce's man had reported back to Royce in the brief window while Ethan was speaking to Abigail. $420 in cash from a man who'd come down from the mountains. By the time Ethan had gotten Abigail to his horses, tethered at the far end of the main street outside the feed store, Royce was already in conversation with Gerald Carter, and Gerald Carter, who had, it must be understood, very few principles and a substantial number of debts, was talking. Ethan didn't know this yet. He was focused on the more immediate problem, which was that Abigail Carter, who had just been through several hours of something genuinely terrible, was standing next to a horse she clearly did not know how to approach and was determined not to show it. "His name is Colt," Ethan said. "He's calm. You can put your hand out. Let him smell you first." Abigail extended her hand slowly toward the horse's nose. Colt sniffed it and then made a small sound of general acceptance. "He's bigger than I expected," she said. "Most things are up close." She looked at him sideways at that. "Where exactly are we going?" "I've got a cabin about 8 miles up into the peaks. Trail's clear this time of year, midsummer, so the snow melt's done." He checked the saddle straps with the kind of automatic habit that meant he'd done it 10,000 times. "Town like this has long arms when it wants something. The mountains don't." "You live up there year-round?" "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." She absorbed that. "And you're proposing I stay what? Ethan looked up from the straps. "As someone who needs somewhere safe to be until you decide what you want to do next. You're not obligated to me. You're not working off anything. You're not—" He paused, and she got the sense he was choosing words carefully. "You're not what Dunbar wanted to make you. That's the whole point." Abigail studied him with those gray eyes. "You do this kind of thing often?" she asked. "No?" he said. "Then why now?" He was quiet for a moment. He picked up the reins of the second horse and handed them to her, and she took them because there was nothing else to take. "Because you kept your chin up," he said finally. "Whole time, even with your hands tied." He stepped up into his saddle in one smooth motion. "Figured somebody ought to notice that." Abigail looked down at the reins in her hands. Then she put her foot in the stirrup and pulled herself up with more difficulty than she would have liked, and considerably more dignity than she had any right to, and she said nothing at all because there were no words that fit this particular moment, and she was smart enough to know it. They rode north. They had not gone a full mile when the trouble became apparent. Ethan heard it first, or rather, he heard the absence of sound that preceded trouble, the specific quiet that settled over terrain when something with intent was moving through it. He pulled up short, and Abigail's horse, following Colt's lead, slowed beside him. "What is it?" she asked. "Riders," he said. "Behind us. 3, maybe 4. She turned. The road south was empty to the visible eye. "I don't see—" "They're past the bend. Give it half a minute." She gave it half a minute. The riders came around the bend. 4 of them. She didn't recognize 3. The 4th was one of Royce Dunbar's regular men. She'd seen him in the Mercantile before, a wide-shouldered man named Cole, who had small eyes and a way of standing too close to people. "Mr. Walker," Cole called out, keeping his horse at a walk. Unhurried, like this was a social call. "Mr. Dunbar sends his regards. He'd like to propose a conversation." "We don't have anything to talk about," Ethan said. "Mr. Dunbar sees it differently." Cole's eyes moved to Abigail. The girls see it's a bit more complicated than a simple debt payment. There was an arrangement made, different arrangement before Gerald brought things to the mercantile. You paid Gerald's debt, doesn't quite cover the older obligation. What older obligation? Abigail said. Cole finally looked at her directly. Mr. Dunbar made a prior agreement with your uncle, Miss Carter, before the gambling debt. Goes back quite a bit further. He paused. In short, he had first claim. The air on the road was very hot. Abigail's hands tightened on the reins, and she made herself loosen them, because she was not going to let this man see her hands shake twice in one day. That's not a legal claim, she said. No contract I signed, no court would recognize. Courts are a long way from here, Miss Carter. That may be, Ethan said, and his voice had changed. Not louder, not harder, just final somehow. The voice of a man who has arrived at the end of a thing. But here's what's also true. I paid Gerald Carter's debt, and I have a receipt from Royce Dunbar himself. He reached slowly into his jacket and produced a folded paper. Signed in front of witnesses. You want to contest that you do it in front of a judge, in a courthouse, like a man with a legal claim would do. He held Cole's gaze. Until that happens, Ethan said, she's not going anywhere with you. Cole looked at the paper. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the three men behind him, who looked back at him with the particular expression of hired men calculating whether a situation had moved outside what they were being paid for. A long silence. Mr. Dunbar's going to want a different resolution, Cole said. Mr. Dunbar, Ethan said quietly, can want whatever he likes. He turned Colt back toward the North Trail. After a moment, a long-waited moment, Abigail turned her horse and followed him. They did not look back. They rode for 2 hours without stopping, moving off the main trail onto a narrower path that wound up through timber. Abigail said nothing for most of it. She was learning the horse, learning the rhythm of the terrain, learning when to lean forward on an incline and when to sit back on the downhill. It was more work than she'd expected. Everything about the body was more work than she'd expected. Ethan rode ahead of her, not so far that she felt abandoned, but far enough that she didn't feel crowded, and she appreciated that without quite having the words for why. It was late afternoon when he pulled up at a creek crossing and dismounted. Rest stop, he said. Let the horses drink. She got down from the saddle, and her legs were more tired than she wanted to admit, and she walked to the creek's edge and crouched there and put her hands in the cold water and held them there, and the cold against her wrists where the rope marks were felt like something she might cry over if she wasn't careful. She was careful. How far? She asked. 3 more miles. Trail gets steeper. I can manage steep. I know, he said. She looked up at him. He was watering Colt. Watching the horse drink, not looking at her, which she had started to notice was a habit of his, he gave people room to feel things without an audience. Thank you, she said. For back there, with Cole and his men. They'll be back, he said. I know. She paused. That's why I'm thanking you now, while there's a moment for it. He looked at her then briefly, the briefest look. You don't owe me thanks, Miss Carter. Abigail, she said, if I'm going to be in your cabin on your mountain, you can call me Abigail. A pause. Abigail. She nodded once like that settled something. You're going to tell me at some point, she said, why you really did it. Back there, in town. I told you why. You told me part of it. She stood up from the creek and dried her hands on her skirt. Men don't spend $400 in their afternoon on strangers for a chin held up at the right angle. There's more to it. Ethan said nothing for a moment. He stroked Colt's neck once with the back of his knuckle. Maybe, he said, there's a part of the story that belongs to me, and I get to keep it. Abigail considered that. Fair enough, she said. She picked up her horse's reins and waited for him to lead. He led. The cabin was not what she had expected, though she would have struggled to say what she had expected. It was built into the slope of the mountain with a solidity that spoke to years of adjustment and improvement, the kind of structure that began as shelter and became gradually something approaching home. Solid timber walls, a door that fit its frame well, a covered porch where tools hung in organized rows, and a pair of boots sat drying in the last of the evening sun. Inside a wood stove, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against the far wall with blankets folded at its foot. A shelf of books, she noted this and stored it somewhere. A rifle on brackets above the door. A map pinned to the wall covered in penciled notes she couldn't read from the door. Clean, spare, considered. "You can have the bed," Ethan said. "I'll take the floor, or the porch if the night's warm enough." "I'm not putting you out of your bed. You're not putting me out of anything. I've slept on the ground more nights than I've slept on a mattress. It won't trouble me." She looked at the bed. She looked at the floor. She was exhausted in a way that went below muscle, the kind of exhaustion that came from months of low-level dread, finally releasing, leaving the body unsure what to do with itself. "All right," she said. He made coffee on the wood stove with the efficiency of long habit. She sat in one of the chairs and watched him because she was too tired to do anything else, and also because there was something in the watching that settled her the simple competence of a person who knew exactly how to do what they were doing. He set a cup in front of her and sat in the other chair. "I need to explain the situation as I see it," he said. "Dunbar's not going to let this go with a receipt and a standoff on the road. He's got reach in this county. He'll find some legal angle, or he'll come at it without one." He wrapped his hands around his own cup. "This cabin's mine, the land around it's mine, and I know every inch of it. That matters. But you should know what you're in the middle of." "I know what I'm in the middle of," Abigail said. "I've been in the middle of something like this for a year. Different shapes, same thing." He waited, and she appreciated that he waited rather than asking. "My uncle accumulated debts I didn't know about," she said. "I came to Caldwell Flats after my mother died because Gerald was the only family I had. That was a mistake." She said this without bitterness, the way she might say the road had been muddy, as information. "He's not a bad man in the way that means intent. He's weak. Weak men cause damage too." "Yes," Ethan said simply. "They do." She looked at her coffee. "He'll want money again, after today, when he sobers up and realizes what happened. He'll come looking for some way to profit from this." She paused. "Does that create a problem for you?" "Miss Carter?" He stopped. "Abigail, Gerald Carter doesn't concern me. Dunbar concerns me. What's your read on Cole?" "The man on the road." "Careful," she said. "Not stupid. He backed down today because he wasn't ready, not because he was persuaded." Ethan nodded slowly, turning his cup in his hands. "That's my read, too." He glanced at her. "You watch people." "I've had to." "What else did you notice?" She looked at him slightly surprised. People did not generally ask her what she noticed. "The 3 men with him were hired, not loyal. They'll take a different job if the one they're on gets complicated or dangerous." She paused. "Dunbar himself won't come. He's not the type to do the hard thing himself. He'll send proxies, legal or otherwise, and he'll do it incrementally. Test what you'll hold." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "That's useful," he said. "I have other skills too," she said. "I'm not entirely a burden you've acquired." "I never thought you were." "You might not have had time to think much about it either way." He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd seen him in that crowd, she saw something that might have been the beginning of a smile. It didn't fully form, but it had the shape of one. "Fair point," he said. Outside, the mountain moved into night. The heat of the day broke slowly the way it did at altitude, the air cooling as the sun dropped behind the peaks, until what was left was a darkness that smelled of pine and cold stone and the distant creek. Abigail finished her coffee. She thought about the road behind them, about Cole's unhurried voice, about the receipt in Ethan's jacket, and the question of how much paper meant against a man with Dunbar's kind of patience and that kind of reach. She thought about her mother who had died in April, and Gerald, who was not a bad man, but was a useless one, and the town she'd left behind in Ohio that had never quite had room for her either. She thought about the way Ethan Walker had walked through a crowd like moving water. She put her cup down on the table. "I know how to set bone," she said, "and stitch wounds. I spent 3 years helping the doctor in our town before I came west. I can read and write and cipher. I know plants, which ones stop bleeding, which ones bring fever down." She looked at him plainly. "I'm telling you this, so you know I'm not helpless. And so you know what I can contribute. Because whatever this is, whatever arrangement we're in, I intend to carry my share of it." Ethan set down his own cup and looked at her across the table. "All right," he said. "All right," she agreed. The fire in the wood stove settled. Outside, far below in Caldwell Flats, Royce Dunbar was in conversation with a man who knew the mountain trails, and Abigail Carter, who had not cried since morning, and did not intend to cry now, lay down on a stranger's bed in a stranger's cabin on the side of a mountain she'd never seen before today. And she pulled the folded blanket up, and she did not feel safe. Exactly. Safety was a thing she'd learned not to count on, but she felt for the first time in a very long time like she was somewhere that had walls, real ones, the kind that had been built to last. She was asleep in 4 minutes. Ethan Walker sat at the table for another hour. He did not read. He did not move much. He turned his coffee cup in his hands, and he looked at the map on the wall, and he thought about trails and timing and what a man like Dunbar would do when patience ran out and receipts stopped mattering. Then he looked at the door and at the rifle above it, and at the window where the mountain dark pressed flat and solid against the glass. Then he blew out the lamp. He did not sleep for a long time. Abigail woke before Ethan did. She knew this because the cabin was quiet in the way places are quiet when only one person is breathing in them, and the breathing she could hear was her own. She lay still for a moment, listening to the mountain. Wind in the pines. A bird she didn't know the name of, somewhere high and distant. The small settled sounds of a structure that had stood long enough to stop complaining about it. Then she got up. The wood stove had gone cold in the night. She found the kindling stacked beside it with the same organized precision she'd noticed in the tools on the porch. Everything in its place. Everything with a purpose. She built the fire the way the doctor's wife in Ohio had taught her. Small pieces, first patience before the larger wood. And she had it going by the time she heard Ethan's boots on the porch steps. He came through the door and stopped. She was standing at the stove with his coffee pot in her hands, and she turned to look at him, and he looked at the fire and at the coffee pot and then at her, and something moved through his expression that she couldn't name precisely. Not gratitude, not surprise. Something quieter than both. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I woke up early," she said. "And I don't know how to do nothing." He took off his hat and set it on the hook by the door. He'd been outside already. She realized, checking something. Checking the perimeter. Checking what the night had left behind. She filed that away. "Coffee's not ready yet," she said. 10 minutes, maybe." "That's fine." He sat in his chair at the table, and she sat in hers, and they waited for the coffee together, and neither of them spoke, and it was the least uncomfortable silence she'd sat in for longer than she could remember. Most silences had weight to them, the weight of things unsaid or tension withheld. This one was just quiet. "Find anything?" she asked. "Outside." He looked at her. "No tracks. Not yet." "Not yet," she repeated. "They'll come," he said. "Cole's not the kind of man who accepts a delay as a resolution. He'll report back to Dunbar. Dunbar will push, and then Cole will come back up the mountain with a better plan than he had yesterday." He paused. "We've got a few days. Maybe a week if Dunbar wants to try the legal angle first." "What does the legal angle look like?" "Depends on who he knows in the county courthouse. If he's got a judge in his pocket, and men like Dunbar usually do, he could file an injunction claim breach of contract, try to get a paper that lets him send a marshal up here instead of hired men." Ethan's jaw was set, but his voice was even. "A marshal's harder to deal with than Cole. Because you can't just stare a marshal down. Because a marshal's got the law on his side whether the law's right or not. He turned his cup in his hands. I know a man in the territorial office. If it comes to that, I can get a message to him. But that takes time. How much time? 2 weeks minimum. The rider, the distance, the waiting for paperwork to move. He looked at her steadily. In the meantime, we work with what we have. The coffee was ready. She poured it and put his cup in front of him and sat back down. What do we have? She asked. This land, he said. These trails. My knowledge of both. He paused. And you apparently knowing how to read a man like Cole. That's a thin hand to play. It's the hand we've got. She drank her coffee and thought about thin hands and what you did with them, and what she'd done with them before, and the particular arithmetic of surviving on very little for a very long time. Teach me the trails, she said. He looked up. If they come while you're not here, she said. Or if we get separated, I need to know the land. Every path, every crossing. I need to know it the way you know it. He held her gaze for a moment. He was evaluating something, not whether she meant it, she thought, but whether she understood what she was asking for. It'll take more than a morning, he said. Then we start this morning and continue tomorrow. Something shifted in his posture. Not quite respect, she got the sense. Respect wasn't something Ethan Walker gave out quickly or easily, but recognition maybe. Recognition of a thing he hadn't quite expected to find. All right, he said. Finish your coffee. He started with the near terrain, the land within a mile of the cabin in every direction. He didn't lecture. He showed. He walked her to a place and he said, This is where the east trail splits. The left fork goes to the creek, crossing. The right fork is a dead end at a rock face. And then he walked her both ways, so her feet knew it, not just her mind. He talked about landmarks, the crooked pine that marked the north boundary, the boulder formation that looked like a sleeping man from the trail, the place where the creek made a sharp sound before the crossing that you could hear when the forest was quiet. He was a different person out here. Not warmer exactly, but more present. In the cabin, he was careful, contained, like a man who'd learned to take up less space than he actually occupied. Out here, he moved with a certainty that had nothing careful about it. He knew this mountain the way she knew her own face in a mirror completely, and without having to think about it. You've been here a long time, she said, between the creek crossing and the north boundary. 11 years. That's a long time to be alone. He didn't answer immediately. They walked for 30 seconds before he said, It's a long time to be somewhere you chose to be. That's different from being alone. Is it? Yes. He glanced at her sideways. You chose to come to Caldwell Flats. Even if it turned out badly, you chose it. That means something. I chose it because there was no better option. Most choices are like that. She considered that. You chose the mountain, she said, because there was no better option, or because it was actually what you wanted. He stopped walking. They were at the crooked pine, the north boundary marker, and he put one hand on its bark, and he looked north up toward the higher peaks that showed through the tree line, pale and clean against the sky. Both, he said finally. At different times. She didn't push past that. Some things you asked once, and then you left alone, and she'd gotten enough of an answer to be going on with. They turned back south. She fell twice on the return, once on a route she miscalculated, once on a loose patch of shale that gave way under her left foot without warning. The first time she caught herself. The second time his hand closed around her forearm before she'd even fully registered the slip. He didn't make anything of it. Just steadied her and let go and kept walking. But she noticed. She stored that away too. The quickness of it, the absence of comment, the way a person who'd spent years alone in terrain that wanted to kill you developed reflexes that operated before the brain caught up. Thank you, she said. Watch the shale, he said. Color of it tells you it's loose, lighter gray than the rock around it. You'll learn to spot it. Show me again. He stopped, crouched, and showed her the difference in the stone. She crouched beside him and looked at what he was pointing to. Their shoulders were 6 inches apart. She could feel the warmth of him in the mountain air. "Lighter gray," she said. "Right." He stood. "And the sound's different if you tap it. Hollow." She tapped the loose shale with her knuckle. Hollow. She tapped the solid rock beside it. Different entirely. "Good," he said, and he said it the way a person says good when they mean it without decoration, and she found that she liked it better than any compliment she'd received in some time. They were back at the cabin by midday. He fed the horses, and she found enough in his stores to make something that constituted a meal: dried beans, hard biscuit. A strip of smoked meat she cut up and rendered in the pan until it gave up its fat and became something useful. She wasn't much of a cook. She knew this about herself honestly, but she was competent and she didn't waste. He came in and looked at the pan and said, "You didn't have to. You fed your horses," she said. "Eat." He ate. They were halfway through the meal when he said without looking up from his plate, "What happened to your parents?" Not a question exactly. More of an opening a door held ajar that she could walk through or not. She made herself eat one more bite before she answered. "My father left when I was 6. Not dramatically just gone one morning. My mother worked. She was a seamstress, and then later she kept books for 2 merchants in town. She was good with numbers." A pause. "She died in April. Consumption. It was fast at the end." "I'm sorry." She would have hated Gerald, Abigail said. She never trusted him. She told me not to go to him if something happened to her, and I didn't listen because there was no one else. She looked at her food. "That's the thing about being told the truth by someone who loves you. You know it's true. You go ahead anyway." Ethan was quiet for the moment. Then he said, "My father and mother both died in a fever outbreak when I was 17. No siblings." He said it the same way she'd said things, as information, not performance. "I know the math. When there's one choice, you take the one choice." "Yes." She looked at him across the table. "What brought you to the mountains?" The question landed and sat there. He kept eating for a moment, not stalling, she thought, but deciding how much to give and how much to keep. "There was a woman," he said, "before, in a town south of here. Her name was May." He set down his fork. "There were men who didn't want me where I was. Cattle dispute the kind that gets settled by other means than lawyers. They came to my property one night and May was there. I was late getting back." His voice didn't change pitch. It didn't roughen or crack. It just stayed even and careful, like a man carrying something across a narrow board. "I was late." Abigail said nothing. After, he said, "The mountains made more sense than anywhere else. Nobody expected anything of me up here. Nobody was at risk because of me." He picked up his fork again. 11 years is long enough for a man to decide whether he's punishing himself or just living. Most of the time I can't tell the difference. The fire in the wood stove made its small sounds. "Most of the time," Abigail said quietly, "is honest enough." He looked at her. She held his gaze not with challenge and not with pity, because she'd learned from years of watching sick people and frightened people and people who'd lost things that pity was its own kind of cruelty when what someone needed was simply to be seen. She saw him. He picked up his coffee and looked away, and she let him. The knock came 3 hours later. Not Cole, not Dunbar's men. That was the first surprise. It was a woman old enough to have deep lines in her brown face and short enough that Abigail was eye to eye with her when she opened the door. She was carrying a covered basket and wearing the look of someone who has already decided how a conversation is going to go. "You'll be the new woman," she said, and walked past Abigail into the cabin before being invited. Ethan was on his feet in an instant. Then he stopped. "Ruth," he said. "Ethan." The woman Ruth set her basket on the table and turned to survey Abigail with the systematic precision of someone who has assessed a great many people and intends to have an opinion. "Cole's men came through the lower trail this morning. 2 of them. I watched from the ridge. They weren't looking for anything specific yet scouting." She looked at Ethan. "You've got less time than you thought." "How much less?" "Cole's back in Caldwell Flats now. He'll resupply and come again, I'd say, by day after tomorrow, and this time he'll have a paper. Dunbar's got Judge Harlan in his pocket and always has. She pulled back the cloth on the basket food preserves wrapped bread. I brought what I could carry. You'll need your stores for longer than a week. Ruth, Ethan said, you didn't have to. I'm aware of what I did and didn't have to do. She turned to Abigail. Ruth Callie, my husband and I had the lower claim before he passed. I stayed. She held out a hand, the kind of handshake a woman offered when she meant it as an equal. You're Gerald Carter's niece. Abigail Carter, Abigail said, shaking it. I've met Gerald Carter. My condolences for the relation. She said this briskly, without malice. You've got a look about you. Your mother's people. My mother. Good. She turned back to Ethan. Judge Harlan will write whatever Dunbar asks him to write, but even Harlan can't move a marshal in less than 3 days from the county seat. You've got that window. Use it. Use it how? Abigail asked. Both of them looked at her. She'd said it directly, and she didn't apologize for it. Ruth's expression shifted slightly, not to approval exactly, but to something adjacent to it. Smart question. The answer is, you build a counter-record. If Dunbar's filing a claim, you file a response. You need to establish that the transaction in Caldwell Flats was legitimate and completed, and that there are no prior claims that hold legal water. She paused. Ethan has the receipt. He does, Abigail said. Signed by Dunbar's own hand in front of witnesses. Do you know who the witnesses were? Abigail thought back. The crowd on the street. The faces. The feed store owner was watching. A man outside the barber's. There were others, I couldn't name them all, but the feed store man, I remember him. He had a red apron. That's Chet Morrow, Ethan said. He's an honest man. He won't lie for Dunbar. Then you need Chet Morrow's written statement, Ruth said. And you need someone to carry it to the territorial office faster than Dunbar's man can carry Harlan's order. She looked at Ethan with the directness of someone who'd known him long enough to skip the polite approaches. That means someone has to go back down to Caldwell Flats, today. The silence that followed was the kind that everyone in it understood. I'll go, Abigail said. Ethan turned to her. No, I'm the one they have a claim on. My presence in town, speaking for myself, carries more legal weight than a courier. She kept her voice steady. And I know how to talk to Chet Morrow. I know what to ask for and how to ask for it without raising alarm. Abigail. Dunbar's men are on the North Trail, she said. Ruth said they came from the lower path this morning and they're back in town now. If we move before evening, the south route is clear. I know it, you showed me this morning. He stared at her. You showed me the south crossing, she said. I remember every landmark you pointed to. I won't get lost. She held his gaze. And I won't be seen if I'm careful. Dunbar's not expecting me to walk back into town myself. Nobody would. That's either very smart or very dangerous, Ruth said. Usually those are the same thing, Abigail said. Ruth looked at Ethan. She's not wrong. Ethan's jaw was set. He looked at Abigail the way she'd seen him look at terrain, finding the risks, mapping the problems, calculating what could be managed and what couldn't. I go with you to the tree line, he said. You take Colt, he knows the South Trail. You ride to Morrow's, you get the statement, you're back on the trail before dark. Agreed. If anything feels wrong, I leave, she said. I know. I mean it. Nothing in Morrow's store is worth Ethan. She said his name quietly, and he stopped. I understand the stakes. I've been managing stakes since before you found me. She looked at him with those gray eyes that didn't flinch from the thing they were looking at. Trust me enough to go and come back. A long beat. He picked up his hat from the hook by the door. I'll saddle Colt, he said. She reached Caldwell Flats before the supper hour. The south entrance to town came in past the livery and the back of the church, which meant she bypassed the main street entirely and came to Chet Morrow's feed store through the alley behind the cooper's shop. She tied Colt loosely ready to move and went in the back. Chet Morrow was a round man in his 50s, with the kind of honest face that couldn't keep a secret even when it was trying to. He looked up when she came in the back, and his face did three things in quick succession: surprise, recognition, and a complicated guilt. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, stepping back from the counter. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," she said just as quietly. "That's why I'm in the back." She pulled the door closed behind her. "You were on the street this morning, when Ethan Walker paid my uncle's debt to Royce Dunbar." His throat moved. "I was." "You saw the exchange. You saw the receipt signed." "I saw it." "I need you to write that down," she said. "Date, time, what you witnessed, your name and your position, signed in front of me." She put her hand into her pocket and put $2 silver on his counter. "That's not for the statement. That's not a payment for your honesty. That's for the paper and the ink and the 10 minutes of your time." He looked at the coins. He looked at her. "Dunbar's got men asking around," he said. "He's going to file something with Harlan. I know. That's why I need the statement now." Chet rubbed the back of his neck. He was scared she could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes kept moving to the front window. Scared of Dunbar. Scared of what being honest cost in a town where honesty had a price. "Miss Carter," he said, "I got a store here. I got a wife. Dunbar controls half the supply routes into this valley." "I know what he controls," she said. "And I know what it costs you to do what's right." She leaned forward slightly. "I'm not asking you to testify in open court. I'm not asking you to stand against Dunbar in public. I'm asking for a piece of paper with what you already know to be true written on it." She held his gaze. "You watched what happened to me on that street this morning. You stood there and you watched." She said it without anger, just plain. "Now I'm asking you what kind of man you are when the crowd's gone home." Chet Morrow stood very still. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a sheet of paper. He wrote for 5 minutes. His handwriting was careful and correct, and he didn't leave out a single relevant detail. Time the amount paid, Dunbar's signature on the original receipt, the names of 3 other men who'd been standing close enough to see. He signed it. He dated it. He pushed it across the counter to her. She folded it and put it in her jacket, and she picked up the $2 silver and put them back in her pocket. "Keep it," she said. "You've earned it honestly." He stared at her. "Why'd you take it back?" "Because what you just did is worth more than $2, she said, "and I don't want you thinking you did it for the money." She went out the back the way she'd come in. She was back at the tree line before full dark. Ethan was there. She'd half expected him to be, though he'd agreed to wait at the cabin. He was standing with his own horse just inside the timber, and he came forward when he heard Colt on the trail, and the expression on his face when he saw her cross the last stretch of open ground was something she kept to herself afterward. Kept in a private place, took out occasionally, and did not examine too closely. "You got it," he said, not a question. He'd seen it in how she was sitting the horse. "Chet Morrow," she said, pulling the folded paper from her jacket. "Every detail, 3 additional witnesses named." She held it out to him. "We send this with Ruth's rider to the territorial office. We have a counter-filing before Harlan's order can be executed." He took the paper, unfolded it, read it in the failing light with the focus of a man who needed to be certain. Then he folded it again and put it inside his own jacket close. "You went back into that town alone," he said, "with Cole's men having been on the trail this morning. Cole's men were on the north trail. I took the south. Abigail." "It worked," she said. "It could have not worked. Most things could not work." She looked at him evenly. "You wanted to protect me. I understand that. But protecting me and trusting me aren't the same thing, and we need both if we're going to get through this." She held his gaze in the dusk. "I came back. I'll keep coming back. But you have to let me go when going is the right call." He stood very still. The forest was full of the sounds of evening birds, settling wind dropping the creek down the slope, with its constant patient voice. "I buried May in September," he said. "Cold came early that year." He wasn't looking at her now, looking at the tree line. 11 years, and sometimes I still hear a horse on the trail, and for just a second, I think just for a second, that she's come back. that I wasn't late. His voice was even. It had the terrible evenness of something said many times internally, worn smooth. When you rode south toward that town, that feeling came back. The one where something's out of my hands and I can't. He stopped. I know, she said quietly. I know what that is. He looked at her. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. He'd said the thing, and she'd received it, and that was what the moment asked for. After a while, he took Colt's reins from her and started back toward the cabin, and she walked beside him, and neither of them spoke, and the silence between them had changed its quality, grown heavier in one way, lighter in another, the way silences do when two people have said something real inside of them. Ruth was at the cabin when they returned. She had the fire going and something hot on the stove, and she looked at the paper Ethan produced with an expression of practical satisfaction. I'll get my man on the Southern Road by dawn, she said. 3 days to the territorial office, 3 days back. You need to hold 6 days. We can hold 6 days, Ethan said. Ruth looked at Abigail. You went back to town. Yes. Alone. Yes. Ruth said nothing for a moment. Then she made a small sound that might have been approval and turned back to the stove. The stew needs another 20 minutes, she said. Sit down, both of you. You look terrible. They sat. Ethan put his elbows on the table and his hands over his face and stayed that way for a moment. Just a moment, the span of 3 or 4 breaths, and Abigail saw in that posture the entire weight of what the day had cost him. The watching and the waiting and the trying to hold a thing together when pieces of it kept moving outside his control. She reached across the table and put her hand over his wrist. Not a grip, not a pressure, just there, present. The way a hand says, I'm not going anywhere when words are too heavy to lift. He went very still. She felt it, the stillness that moved through him, the precise quality of a person who has been not touched for so long that touch itself has become startling. She didn't move her hand. After a moment, he lowered his hands from his face. He looked at her hand on his wrist. He looked at her. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. Ruth stirred the stew and didn't turn around. And outside the mountain held its positions, and inside the cabin, the fire burned exactly as steadily as it had been built to burn, and between the two of them, at that table, something that had no name yet and didn't need one, moved into the small space where two people had started against all odds and most good sense to trust each other. The stew was ready in 20 minutes. They ate, and in Caldwell Flats, Royce Dunbar was reading a document that Judge Harlan had prepared, and he was smiling the way men smile when they believe the law is simply another tool. And Cole was cleaning his rifle, and the writer they'd hired, the one who knew the mountain trails, was eating his supper and thinking about how much he was being paid and whether it was enough. It wasn't. But he didn't know that yet. Ruth's rider left before dawn. Abigail heard him go, the soft sound of hooves on the trail, moving south, careful and quiet, the kind of riding a man did when he didn't want to be heard. She lay still for a moment after listening to the cabin settle back into silence, and then she got up, because lying still had never suited her. Ethan was already at the table with his coffee and his map. He didn't look up when she came out of the back room, but he pushed her cup toward her side of the table, already filled, and she sat down and picked it up. And that small thing. The cup, waiting already done without being asked, settled somewhere in her chest in a way she didn't examine. 6 days, she said. 6 days. He agreed. What do we do with them? He spread his hand flat on the map. Cole knows the North Trail now. He won't come that way again, too exposed, too easy to watch. He'll come from the east through the timber, or he'll split his men and come both ways at once. He tapped 2 points on the map. These 2 positions are the problem. Here and here. If a man gets to either one before we see him, he's got the high ground. She looked where he was pointing. Can we block them? Not block, but we can make them loud. He finally looked up. There's a way of stringing wire low through the timber, not to stop a man, but to catch trip and make noise. Give us warning. He paused. I need help setting it. 2 people working from both ends of the line. Show me what to do, she said. He looked at her for a moment, the look she'd started to recognize, the one that preceded his, adjusting some expectation he'd formed, without knowing he'd formed it. "All right," he said. They went out after breakfast. He carried the wire coiled over one shoulder, and she carried the stakes. And he showed her how to read the terrain for the right height, low enough to catch a boot, high enough not to be seen from above. And she drove stakes while he ran the line. And they worked in that particular quiet that people fall into when they're doing a physical task together and have reached the level of trust where commentary isn't needed. She drove the third stake wrong, and he came over and corrected the angle without comment. Just adjusted it with his hand and moved on. And she watched the correction and understood it and drove the rest correctly. In 2 hours, both approaches were wired. They were walking back toward the cabin when she said, "The east approach, there's a gap between the third and fourth stakes. The line dips." He stopped, turned to look back down the slope. Quiet for a moment. "You've got a good eye. The light hits differently there. You can see the wire if you know what to look for." "Cole's man wouldn't know what to look for." "But Cole might," she said. "He's not stupid." Ethan stood still for another 3 seconds thinking. Then he turned around and walked back down to the gap and corrected it. And she stood at the top of the slope and watched him work and said nothing because there was nothing needed. When he came back up, he looked at her with that almost not a smile. "You're useful," he said. "I've been trying to tell you that," she said. He made a sound that might in a different man have been a laugh. They went back to the cabin. The first wire sang at 2 in the afternoon. Not loud. A brief metallic shiver that Ethan heard because he was listening for it the way he was always listening now. That particular layer of attention running underneath everything else he did. He was at the woodpile. Abigail was on the porch restitching a bridle strap that had frayed. He was inside the cabin and had the rifle down from the bracket above the door before she'd registered what the sound was. "East approach," he said low as he came back through the door. 1, maybe 2. She was already on her feet. The horses. Already in the back pasture, closed gate. He looked at her. "Get to the back room. There's a board loose under the bed frame left side. There's a pistol under it, loaded." "I know how to use a pistol." "I know you do," he said. "That's why I'm telling you where it is." He checked the rifle and moved to the front window. "Stay low." She went to the back room. She found the loose board. She found the pistol, a solid Smith & Wesson well-maintained, which didn't surprise her. She checked the cylinder and came back to the doorway of the back room, which gave her a sight line to the front window and the door at the same time, and she crouched there and she waited. It was 3 minutes. 3 minutes was a long time to be very still and quiet, while someone moved through the timber toward the place where you were. Then a voice from outside at distance. "Mr. Walker, we'd like a conversation." Not Cole's voice. Someone else. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was reading the sound where it came from. How far, whether there were other sounds beneath it. "How many men with you?" he called back. A pause. Then, "Just the 2 of us. No weapons drawn. Mr. Dunbar's sent a legal communication. We're obligated to deliver it, and that's all." Ethan glanced back at Abigail. She shook her head slightly. She didn't recognize the voice either. "Set it on the ground," Ethan said. "Step back 10 paces. I'll retrieve it." Another pause. Then the sound of something being set down. Then boots moving back through leaves. Ethan went out low and fast and came back in 30 seconds with a folded document and was back inside with the door closed before Abigail had taken 2 full breaths. He read it standing up. His jaw went tight. "What?" she said. He held it out. She crossed the room and took it. It was from Judge Harlan's office, dated yesterday, which meant Dunbar had gotten to Harlan even faster than Ruth had predicted. It was dense legal language, but the core of it was plain enough, a temporary injunction against Ethan Walker citing a disputed claim to the person of Abigail Carter, ordering that said person be held accessible to the court's representative, pending a hearing in 14 days at the county seat. The county seat was 4 days south. "He moved faster than Ruth said he could," Abigail said. "Yes." "How?" Ethan took the paper back. He must have already had Harlan writing before Cole came back from the mountain. He started the legal process the same morning, didn't wait for the standoff report. He set the paper on the table. Which means he anticipated I'd use the receipt. He knows you, she said. He knows men like me, men who follow legal channels when they can. Ethan's voice was level, but she could hear the thing underneath it. The recalculation, the rapid reordering of what he'd expected to have time for. This injunction gives him cover. If he sends men up here now, he can claim they're acting under court order. Can they legally? Legally is a complicated word out here. He looked at her steadily. What they can do is walk up to this cabin with that paper in hand and claim they're executing a court's instruction. Whether it holds up later in front of a proper judge doesn't matter much in the moment. Abigail read the paper again. She read it carefully, the way she'd read things all her life, not for the surface of it, but for what was in the structure underneath. Her mother had taught her that. Every contract has a soft place if you look for it. She found it on the third read. This names me as subject, she said. Not you. There's no action ordered against you, no warrant, no order to arrest or detain. The injunction is about my accessibility to the court. She looked up. Which means, if I appear at the county seat willingly on my own, the court order is technically satisfied. Dunbar loses his justification for sending men. Ethan was very still. It's a 4-day ride, he said carefully. I know. Through terrain Dunbar's men know. I know that too. She set the paper on the table between them. But if I appear before whatever Judge Harlan puts in front of me, and I go with Chet Morrow's statement, with your receipt, with Ruth's records, if she has any, the legal case is mine, not Dunbar's. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not disagreement, not fear exactly, something older and more complicated than either. You'd ride to the county seat, he said. Yourself. With you, she said. I wasn't suggesting alone. He looked at the paper. He looked at her. He picked the paper up and read the relevant passage again, and she watched him read it and saw the moment he reached the same conclusion she had. We'd need to move within the day, he said, before Cole gets here with men who have a copy of this. Then we move within the day. Ruth needs to know. Send word to Ruth. She can redirect her rider, have him meet us on the southern road instead of going to the territorial office. She was already thinking 3 moves ahead, the way her mother's people thought, the way you thought when you'd spent your life making thin hands work. If we have the territorial office's attention on the county seat hearing, Harlan can't control the outcome. Ethan set the paper down. He was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Pack what you can carry on Colt, he said. She was already moving toward the back room. They were on the South Trail within the hour. Ruth had been found and told in 10 minutes. The woman received news, the way she received everything, with the focused attention of someone who never wasted energy on reaction before understanding. She'd sent her son with a message for her rider before Ethan and Abigail had cleared her property. The South Trail was longer than the North and less direct, threading through timber and across 2 creek crossings before it met the wider road that ran to the county seat. Ethan led. Abigail kept pace. She was better on the horse now than she'd been 2 days ago. Not easy, but competent, and she didn't waste breath on discomfort. They were 2 miles out from the cabin when she heard the horses behind them. She heard them before Ethan did, which surprised them both. 3 riders, she said without turning, moving fast. He pulled up and listened. East approach, he said. They came around, they didn't come through the wire. They found the gap. They found the gap. His voice was flat and very controlled. The one I corrected. There must have been a second gap I didn't see. She kept her voice steady. How far behind? A mile, maybe less. He scanned the terrain around them, not looking for safety. She realized, looking for advantage. There's a crossing ahead, 1/4 mile. Water's fast this time of year. If we cross before they see us, they'll spend 10 minutes finding a safe ford. Then we ride. They rode. Colt hit the water of the crossing with a sound like a thrown stone, and came up the far bank without breaking stride, and her horse followed, because horses followed colt, and the water was cold and loud, and she gripped with her knees and leaned forward, and they were through in 40 seconds. Ethan pulled up on the far bank and turned to look back. The 3 riders came out of the timber on the south side of the crossing. Cole in front, 2 men behind. Cole pulled up at the water's edge. He and Ethan looked at each other across 40 feet of fast water. "Walker," Cole called. "We've got a court order. This doesn't have to be a chase." "Read the order more carefully," Ethan called back. "It doesn't give you authority to detain anyone. It's an accessibility order. She's going to satisfy it herself at the county seat." He kept his horse still. "Get out of the way, Cole." Cole looked at the water. He looked at his men. He looked back at Ethan. "Mr. Dunbar's not going to see it that way." "Mr. Dunbar," Ethan said, "can argue with the circuit judge when we get there." He turned his horse south and rode. Abigail followed. Behind them she heard Cole shouting at his men about the ford, about the crossing, about getting downstream to a shallower point, and the sound of his frustration was, she had to admit, briefly satisfying. They rode hard for an hour before slowing to save the horses. The landscape changed as they descended warmer air, the smell of dry grass replacing pine, the particular sound of open country after the density of timber. She noticed these things peripherally, through the filter of the speed and the urgency, but she cataloged them anyway, because she cataloged everything. "They'll catch up," she said. "Eventually." "Eventually," he agreed. "But not before Pryor." "What's Pryor?" "Town about 8 miles ahead. Small, but it's got a telegraph office and a justice of the peace." He glanced at her. "If we file an intent to appear at the county seat hearing formal through the telegraph through the JP, the injunction loses most of its teeth. Cole can't drag you off the road if you're already in the legal process voluntarily. Does Cole know that—" "Cole's not a lawyer, but Dunbar might." She thought about that. "Then Dunbar will try to intercept us before Pryor." "Yes." "How?" "He's had a telegraph line to the county seat for 2 years, Ethan said. "He'll wire ahead. Try to get the JP and Pryor to hold us." "Can he?" "Depends on whether Pryor's JP owes Dunbar anything." He looked at her sideways. "Small towns out here, everybody owes somebody something. It's the economy." Abigail turned this over in her mind. "What's the JP's name?" "Man named Aldous Webb. Been in Pryor for about 5 years. He's from Pennsylvania originally, which matters because Dunbar's reach is local. Webb doesn't owe him the way someone who grew up here might." "That's something." "It's a small something." "I've been working with small somethings my whole life," she said. "Let's get to Pryor." They were 4 miles out when Ethan's horse threw a shoe. He felt it before he heard it. The change in gait, the subtle irregularity, and he pulled up immediately and was down and checking the hoof before Abigail had fully processed what had happened. She got down and came around to look. "How bad?" she said. "He can walk. He can't be pushed." He straightened up and the calculation on his face was clear and quick and landed somewhere she didn't like the look of. "1 horse can carry 1 person faster than 2 horses and 1 walking." "No," she said immediately. "Abigail, I'm not riding ahead while you walk. We've been through this. This is different." His voice was not raised. It was precise. "You need to get to Webb before Dunbar's telegraph does. Every minute matters. If you ride now hard, you get there first. If we both walk, Dunbar's message gets there before us, and Webb starts this conversation already told our story wrong." She looked at him. She looked at Colt. She looked at the road. "You're 4 miles from town on a road in daylight," she said. "Yes." "Cole's still behind us. He'll come through here." "Cole can't touch me," he said. "The injunction's on you, not me. I'm just a man walking a lame horse to the nearest smithy." Something moved in his expression. Almost dry, almost a thing that could have been wry. "I look extremely unthreatening." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You have never looked unthreatening in your life." "I'll work on it." She took Colt's reins from him. She looked at him for one more moment, the full look, the one that said she was noting him and his safety, and the fact of Cole behind them, and the 4 miles he'd be walking in all of it. "I'll have Webb ready when you get there," she said. "I know you will." She put her foot in the stirrup and mounted. "Ethan." She looked down at him. "Don't let Cole push you around on that road." "I never let anyone push me around on a road," he said. She believed him. She rode. Aldous Webb was a thin man who wore his authority the way some men wore good suits, not because it made him feel important, but because it was the appropriate thing for the occasion. He had sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers, and he listened to Abigail Carter, without interrupting her, which immediately elevated him in her estimation. She laid out the facts in order the same way she'd been laying out information her whole life, structured, precise, nothing wasted. The debt, the payment, the receipt, the injunction, the witness statement from Chet Morrow that she produced from her jacket and set on his desk. Webb read the Morrow statement without hurry. "And the receipt itself," he said. "Ethan Walker has it. He'll be here within the hour his horse threw a shoe on the South Road." Webb looked up. "He's walking in. He's walking in." Webb's expression shifted in a way she couldn't fully categorize, something between assessment and something warmer. "He's a stubborn man." "You know him." "By reputation, this part of the territory's smaller than it looks." He set down the Morrow statement and folded his hands on the desk. "Miss Carter, you understand what you're asking me to do. If I file your intent to appear, I'm putting myself in a position that Royce Dunbar will not appreciate." "I understand that," she said. "Dunbar has relationships in this county that go back 20 years. "I understand that too." "And you're asking me to back your claim against his on the strength of a witness statement and a receipt I haven't seen yet from a woman who rode in alone on a borrowed horse." "I'm asking you," she said, "to uphold the law, which is, I believe, what the citizens of Pryor pay you to do." She held his gaze. "Dunbar's had a telegraph advantage over me since this morning. I'm asking for 30 minutes of your honest attention to balance that. You can make your decision after Ethan Walker gets here with the receipt." Webb looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. "I'll have the form ready," he said, "when Mr. Walker arrives." Ethan arrived 53 minutes later. He was dusty from the road, and his jaw had a set that told her something had happened on the 4 miles. But he came through the door and he looked at her face, and whatever was in her face settled something in him. He put the receipt on Webb's desk. Webb read it. He read it once, then read the relevant section again, and then he looked at Dunbar's injunction that Abigail had also provided, and he looked at the dates and the signatures, and his face did what honest faces do when they've seen something unambiguous. "The injunction is post-dated," he said. "Dunbar's receipt is dated before the injunction was filed. Any court seeing this will dismiss Harlan's order in the first 10 minutes. "That's what I thought," Abigail said. Webb looked at Ethan. "You walked 4 miles with a lame horse and a court order chasing you to bring me a receipt." "The receipt was the point," Ethan said. "Cole catch up to you on the road." The set of Ethan's jaw gave its answer before he spoke. "He tried." "How'd that go?" "About like you'd expect." Webb looked at them both for a moment. This man who was dusty and set-jawed and had walked 4 miles without complaint, and this woman who had ridden in ahead of him and laid out a legal case with the precision of someone who'd been preparing arguments her whole life, which Webb suspected she had. He picked up his pen again. He filed the intent to appear. He filed the counter-affidavit based on the Morrow statement and the receipt. He sent both by telegraph to the circuit court's office, bypassing Judge Harlan's jurisdiction entirely. "That telegraph," he said as he handed them copies, "goes to a judge that Royce Dunbar has never had a conversation with. His name is Edmund Cross, and he has been the circuit judge for this district for 12 years, and he does not owe Dunbar anything because he has never needed anything from Dunbar." Webb looked at Abigail. "You'll get a fair hearing." She took the copies. Her hands were steady. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Webb said. "Come back in 14 days and win it." Chinch. They ate supper in Pryor at a place Webb recommended, a boarding house that served meals for 2 bits, and they sat across from each other at a table in the corner, and Abigail finally ate something hot and did not speak for the first several minutes because she was too tired and too hungry and too relieved to manage conversation. Ethan was the same. He ate with the focused silence of a man who'd needed food for several hours and hadn't prioritized it. Halfway through the meal, she said, "What happened on the road with Cole?" He took a drink of water. He caught up about a mile before town. He and one man, the other 2 had fallen back. He paused. He told me to hand over the receipt. And I told him no. And then he looked at her across the table. His man moved first. I moved faster. He said this with the complete absence of drama that she'd started to understand was not coldness, but simply the way a man talked about things that had already happened and been survived. Nobody's hurt. Cole's man has a new opinion about what's worth pushing for. Cole himself is going to report to Dunbar that the situation got complicated. "You have bruising on your right hand," she said. He looked at his right hand. "Some. I have supplies in Colt's saddlebag. You brought medical supplies on a ride we decided on in 40 minutes. I always bring medical supplies," she said. "It's a habit I formed because the world is what it is." He looked at her with that look, the one she'd been collecting all week, the one that went through whatever surface she presented and saw the thing underneath it, the full, actual thing. "You're remarkable," he said. He said it the way he said everything that mattered, quietly, without decoration, as fact. She felt it go through her the way cold water felt after a long ride. Settling, clean. "Don't go getting sentimental on me," she said. "We've got 14 days to prepare for a court hearing." "I know. And Cole's going to regroup and come back with something worse." "I know that too. So..." She pushed the last of her food onto his plate because he'd finished before her, and she could see he needed it. "Eat, and then tell me what you know about the road back, and where Dunbar's men are most likely to set up." He looked at his plate. He looked at her. "You put your food on my plate," he said. "You're larger than me, and you walked 4 miles and hit someone. You need the calories." He picked up his fork. He ate. And somewhere in that plain small thing, the food pushed across the table. Taken without argument, the meal shared in a corner of a boarding house in a small town. While the road outside held its uncertainties, somewhere in that ordinariness that was nothing like ordinary Abigail Carter understood that she was no longer calculating exits. She had not noticed when that had changed. She noticed it now. She picked up her water and looked at the window and kept the realization to herself, because some things you found and sat with quietly for a while before you let anyone else see them. Outside, the night was settling over Pryor, and in Caldwell Flats, Royce Dunbar read the telegraph he'd received from his man in Pryor, the one that said the filing had been made that Circuit Judge Edmund Cross was now involved, that the thing Dunbar had assumed was a simple property retrieval had become something significantly more complicated. He set the telegraph down. He picked up his pen. He wrote a letter. It was addressed to a man 3 territories east who owed Dunbar a favor that had nothing to do with law or courts or judges named Cross. It had to do with a different kind of resolution, the kind that happened on roads in the dark before anyone could file anything at all. They stayed the night in Pryor. Webb arranged it 2 rooms at the boarding house, clean and spare, the kind of rooms that didn't ask questions about who you were or where you'd come from. Abigail sat on the edge of her bed for a long time before she lay down, going through everything in her mind, the way she went through supply inventories methodically. Nothing skipped, nothing assumed to be in order until she'd checked it herself. The filing was done. Cross was involved. The receipt and Morrow's statement were on their way to a judge who didn't owe Dunbar anything. These were the things on her side of the ledger. On the other side, 14 days until the hearing. 4 days of road between here and the county seat. A man 3 territories east that Dunbar had written to, though she didn't know about that yet. And Cole, who was regrouping somewhere south of the mountain with an anger that had been building since the moment Ethan Walker had set a leather pouch on Royce Dunbar's porch railing. She lay down, and she slept because exhaustion made the decision for her, and she was practical enough not to fight it. In the room next to hers, Ethan sat in the chair by the window and watched the street below for a long time. Not because he expected anything. Pryor was quiet and small, and Cole didn't know they'd stopped here. But because watching was what his body did when the situation hadn't been resolved, when the thing he was responsible for was still at risk, when sleep felt like a kind of abandonment he hadn't earned yet. He thought about May. He thought about her the way he had learned over 11 years to think about her, not with the acute agony of the first years, which had been something close to unsustainable, but with the particular ache of something that had shaped everything after it. The way a break in a bone leaves a place that knows weather. You didn't stop feeling it. You just learned to live inside it. He thought about the way Abigail had pushed her food across the table. He thought about her hand on his wrist that evening in the cabin with Ruth at the stove, the specific weight of it, the way it had gone through him like a sound through water. He sat in the chair by the window, and he did not reach any conclusions, because he was not ready to reach conclusions, and he knew the difference between a thing being clear and a thing being safe to act on. Eventually he slept. The morning was already warm when they rode out. They made good time on the first day. The south road was open and dry, the kind of road that let horses find their rhythm and keep it. And Ethan's horse had been reshod at the Pryor smithy before dawn. The man had opened early for 2 bits extra, and hadn't asked why they were leaving before sunrise. Abigail rode beside Ethan now, rather than behind him, which had happened gradually over the past days without either of them remarking on it. "Tell me about Edmund Cross," she said somewhere in the second hour. "Webb spoke well of him." "Webb's a man. Tell me what Cross looks like to someone who's going to have to convince him." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "He's been on this circuit 12 years. Before that, he was in Missouri, came west after the war. He runs his courtroom tight. He doesn't like theater." He glanced at her. "He responds to facts and sequence. Give him the events in order. Give him the documents in the order they happened, and don't try to appeal to his sympathy." Because he doesn't have sympathy. Because he has it, but he's learned not to decide by it. Ethan paused. A judge who decides by feeling can be worked by someone who's better at performance than truth. Cross decided a long time ago he wasn't going to be that judge. "Facts and sequence," she said. "I can do that." "I know you can." They rode in silence for a while. The road curved south, and the mountain behind them was no longer visible, and she felt the absence of it in a way she hadn't expected, like putting down something you'd been carrying long enough to forget you were carrying it. "When this is over," she said, "and Cross rules in our favor, and he will, what happens to Dunbar depends on how far Cross wants to go. The injunction was improper on its face. Harlan signed off on it anyway. If Cross refers that to the territorial bar, Harlan loses his appointment." He thought about it. Dunbar doesn't face criminal charges for any of this. What he did was ugly, but most of it was technically legal. He'll lose the case and lose Harlan, and that'll cost him. "But not enough," she said. "No," he said. "Probably not enough." She absorbed that. "And Gerald." "Your uncle." "My uncle." She said it with the particular weight of someone who had accepted a difficult fact. "He'll go back to gambling. He'll find another card game and another Royce Dunbar and another obligation he can't meet." "Probably." "I know that," she said. "I'm not asking you to tell me different." She looked at the road ahead. "I just wanted to say it out loud, to someone who wouldn't try to soften it." "He's weak," Ethan said. "Like you said, you can't fix that by forgiving it, and you can't fix it by not forgiving it. It just is." "Yes," she exhaled. "It just is." They rode another mile before she said, "Thank you for not softening it." "You've never needed things softened," he said. "No," she said. "I haven't." Bjorn. The ambush came at the river crossing on the afternoon of the second day. Not Cole. That was the first thing Ethan registered wrong. Horses' wrong way of holding themselves in the saddle wrong everything. These were not the men who'd been on the mountain or on the prior road. These were different men, and they'd been here a while waiting, which meant they'd known the route, which meant Dunbar's letter had traveled faster than it had any right to. There were 4 of them positioned on the north bank of the crossing, and they came out of the scrub with the unhurried confidence of men who'd chosen their ground well and knew it. The one in front was big, not Ethan's kind of big, which was earned through years of work, but the kind of big that was simply a fact of bone and mass. He had a flat face and pale eyes, and he looked at Ethan the way men looked at obstacles. "Walker," he said. "Just the name. Like that was enough." Ethan pulled up. Beside him, Abigail stopped without being told. "I don't know you," Ethan said. "You don't need to." The man's eyes moved to Abigail. "The woman comes with us. No papers, no courts, no riding anywhere. Dunbar's done with that approach." "So he found someone outside the county," Ethan said. "Smart man. Not smart enough to think this ends well for him." Ethan's voice was level. "You're outside Harlan's jurisdiction. You're outside Cole's jurisdiction. You're 4 men on a road who've just told a witness your employer's name." The big man smiled. It did not improve his face. "The witness doesn't make it to the county seat. That's not much of a problem." The word witness landed wrong and cold in the air. Abigail said nothing. She felt the situation with the part of her that had been reading rooms and men and bad odds since childhood. And she read this one plainly. These men had been paid to make the problem disappear, not to negotiate. The legal process was done from Dunbar's perspective. This was what came after legal processes. "How many bullets do you have?" she said quietly to Ethan. "Enough," he said, equally quiet. "There are 4 of them." "I'm aware of the count." "Ethan, I'm not going to shoot 4 men on a road in front of you," he said, still in that low register that didn't carry. "That's not what this is." Then, louder to the men on the bank. "What did he pay you?" The big man shifted. "That's not... I'm asking because whatever it is, it's not enough for a federal charge. You're 300 yards from the prior county line. Anything that happens here gets investigated out of the territorial office, not Harlan's bench." Ethan reached slowly into his jacket. Both hands visible movements telegraphed, and produced the copies of the web filing. He held them up so the men could see the official stamps. "This woman is a named party in an active circuit court proceeding. Anything that happens to her is now a federal matter. That changes what Dunbar can protect you from." The big man looked at the papers. He couldn't read them from 30 feet, but the stamps were visible. One of the men behind him said something low that Ethan couldn't catch. "Here's what I'm offering," Ethan said. "You ride back to wherever Dunbar found you. You tell him the papers were already filed and the situation is past fixing by this method. You keep whatever he's already paid you. Nobody here knows your names." Silence. The creek made its sounds. Somewhere a bird called once and stopped. The big man looked at his men. He looked at the papers. He looked at Ethan, who was sitting his horse with the specific stillness of a man who was prepared for whatever the next 30 seconds required and was not afraid of any version of it. "And if we don't take that offer?" the big man said. Ethan said nothing. He just looked at the man and let the silence say it. The big man's jaw worked. Then he turned his horse. All 4 of them went back into the scrub, and the sound of them faded south, and the crossing was empty again. Abigail let out a breath. "That," she said, "was very close." "Yes," Ethan said. "They might come back tonight. On the road." "They might?" He looked at the crossing, then north, then back at her. "We don't sleep on the road tonight. We find a farmstead, and we ask to sleep in a barn, and we pay for it, and we're on the road before dawn." "Agreed." She paused. "What you said to them about the federal charge, was that true?" "Mostly." "Mostly." "The filing does create a federal interest. Whether that specific charge would hold is a longer legal question." He looked at her sideways. They didn't know the longer legal question. She looked at him. "You bluffed." "I gave them accurate information in the most persuasive order," he said. "That's a very dignified way to say you bluffed." Something moved in his expression. The almost smile. Ruth told me once that the difference between a bluff and a negotiation is whether you could back it up if you had to. He paused. I could have backed it up if I had to. Could you actually have handled 4 of them? A pause. I would have tried very hard. She looked at him for a moment. This man, who had walked 4 miles with a lame horse, and hit Cole's man on the road, and sat in a chair by a window all night, watching a quiet street, and had just stared down 4 hired men with a piece of paper and 11 years of particular stillness. You would have gotten hurt, she said. Probably, he said. But that wasn't going to change the answer. She turned her horse to the crossing. Come on, she said. Let's find a barn before dark. Chipway. The barn belonged to a wheat farmer named Haskell, who had a wife named June, who took one look at Abigail's face and the state of both their horses and said, You'll eat supper first, in a tone that permitted no argument. They ate at the Haskell table with the farmer and his wife and their 2 daughters who were 12 and 9, and stared at Ethan with the frank attention children gave to large quiet men who appeared at their supper table without much explanation. The 9-year-old asked him if he'd ever fought a bear. Once, he said. Who won? She asked. He showed her the scar on his left forearm. Does that mean the bear won? She said. It means we reached an agreement, he said. The 9-year-old thought about this and decided it was satisfactory. Abigail watched this from across the table and felt something shift in her chest. The same quiet interior movement she'd been feeling for several days now. The one she kept setting aside because the road and the situation demanded her attention be on other things. After supper, June showed her where to wash up, and she stood at the basin, and she looked at her own reflection in the small mirror above it, and she said quietly to herself, Not yet, after the hearing. Her reflection looked back at her with gray eyes that were unconvinced. She dried her hands and went out. They were in the barn, and the Haskell house had gone dark when Ethan said, You should know something. She was sitting against the wall with her knees up and her jacket across her shoulders, and she looked at him across the darkness. All right, she said. When this is done, when Cross rules and the case is settled, I told you from the start that I'd see you to wherever you wanted to go. He paused. Town, city. Somewhere with more options than a mountain cabin. That was the arrangement. I remember the arrangement, she said. I want to be clear that I'm still holding to it. His voice was careful and direct, the way it always was when he was saying something that cost him something. Whatever you decide, wherever you decide to go, I'll see you there, and I'll make sure you have enough to start, and I won't. He stopped. Started again. I won't make it complicated. Your choice is your choice, and I won't put weight on it. The barn was very quiet. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Because I don't want to tell you after Cross rules and have it feel like I'm trying to manage what you decide. He shifted his weight, and she heard it rather than saw it. You've never had a clean choice, Abigail. Not once since your mother died. I don't want to be one more thing that obscures a clear view. She sat with that for a moment. A clear view of what? She said. Of what you actually want, for yourself. Not what you're settling for, not what the available options are, not what's practical given what just happened. What you want. The night sounds of the barn filled the space between them, the horses shifting the small lives in the walls and rafters, the wheat field outside with its dry whisper. What if what I want, she said, is not what you expect me to want? He was quiet. What if it's not a city, she said. What if it's not a fresh start somewhere with better options? She kept her voice even because this was not a performance. This was just the truth, said plainly, which was the only way she knew to say things. What if the clearest view I have is of a cabin on a mountain that has walls that hold... A long silence. Abigail, he said carefully, I know what you're going to say. You don't. You're going to say I'm grateful. That gratitude and choice look alike from the inside, but they're different animals. She paused. You're going to say that I've been through something difficult, and I'm not far enough from it to see clearly. a beat. Yes, he said. That's what I was going to say. I know. She pulled her jacket tighter. And I'm not arguing with you. I'm not telling you my mind is made up and you have to accept it. I'm just telling you that when I look at a clear view, the clearest view I can manage what I see isn't away from the mountain. She paused. That's all I'm saying tonight. The silence after that was different from the silences before it. Fuller, like a room after someone has opened a window. All right, he said finally. All right, she said. Neither of them said anything else. She slept better than she had in a week. They reached the county seat at noon on the fourth day. It was larger than Caldwell Flats, a real town with a newspaper office and a bank with a stone front and a courthouse that had steps and actual columns and the look of a place that took its institutional weight seriously. Abigail felt the shift in scale the moment they rode in. This was where her case lived now. This was where Dunbar's reach either held or didn't. She squared her shoulders and rode straight to the courthouse. Edmund Cross was not what she'd expected. She didn't know what she'd expected, something more imposing, maybe something that matched the gravity of the word circuit judge. What she got was a slight man in his 60s, with a white beard trimmed short and reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and the particular focused patience of someone who had heard a very great number of things in rooms like this one and was prepared to hear more. He had the web filing on his desk. He had Morrow's statement. He had Dunbar's injunction and Harlan's order. He read them all while Abigail and Ethan sat across from him and did not speak. Then he set them down and looked at her over his glasses. "Miss Carter," he said, "I want to hear it from you, from the beginning." She told him, facts and sequence. The way Ethan had said nothing, performed nothing reaching for sympathy. The debt, the rope, the payment, the receipt, the injunction that post-dated the settled transaction by 20 hours. The men on the South Road who hadn't given names. Cross listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The men on the South Road. You don't know their names?" "No. But they said Dunbar's name." "The one in front did, yes." Cross made a note. "Mr. Walker." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "You were present for the original transaction?" "Yes." "You hold the original receipt?" Ethan produced it and laid it on the desk. Cross looked at it. He looked at the date. He looked at Harlan's order again. He made another note. "I'll need 3 days to review and issue a ruling," Cross said. "There's a boarding house on Clement Street. The woman who runs it is named Adler. She's honest. Tell her I sent you." He looked at them both. "In the meantime," he said, "don't go anywhere." The 3 days were the strangest of all of them. After the road, after the wire on the mountain and the creek crossings, and the South Trail, and the men at the river crossing, after all of that 3 days of simply waiting in a town that didn't know them, felt almost surreal. Mrs. Adler's boarding house was clean, and her meals were good, and she asked no questions, which Abigail appreciated deeply. Ethan was restless. She could feel it in the way he moved through rooms through the town when they walked. He was a man built for doing, and the doing had temporarily stopped, and the waiting sat on him like weather. She found him the second evening sitting on the boarding house steps. She sat beside him. "Cross is going to rule in our favor," she said. "I know." "Then what's it?" He looked at his hands. "Dunbar's going to face very little consequence," he said. "I've been thinking about that. What he did to you, the whole construction of it. The gambling arrangement with Gerald the Prior. He claimed to have putting that rope on you in the middle of a town full of people watching all of that. And what he faces is a dismissed case and a compromised judge." His jaw was tight. "It bothers me." "It bothers me too," she said. "It shouldn't end there." "No." She was quiet for a moment. "But it might." She looked at the street. "The world doesn't always complete its accounting. You know that better than most." He looked at her. "May," she said simply. He looked away. Yes. The men who came to your property didn't face what they should have faced. No. And you learned to live inside that. I learned to live inside the mountain, he said. Which is a different thing. Is it? She turned to look at him. You went up there to be somewhere your being there couldn't cost anyone. You arranged your life so the ledger couldn't go wrong again. She said it plainly, not as indictment, just as the fact it was. But the thing that made the ledger go wrong in the first place, the men, the choices they made, they still went on living their lives. He said nothing. Dunbar will too, she said, without enough consequence, and we don't get to fix that. She paused. What we get to do is not let it keep costing us. That's the only accounting we control. A long silence. He looked at his hands again, then at the street, then slowly at her. How do you do that? He said. Do what? Say the hard thing, the true thing, without it sounding like a sermon or a consolation. He shook his head slightly. You just say it like it's the weather. My mother, she said. She couldn't afford comfortable lies, and she didn't offer them. She said what was true, and she said it clean, and she expected me to be able to hear it. Abigail looked at the street. It's the best thing she gave me. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, My mother used to sing, in the kitchen. She had a terrible voice, but she didn't know it or she didn't care. Same 3 songs over and over. He paused. I can't remember the words anymore. Just that she sang. It was, she realized, the most he'd offered unprompted. Not in answer to a question, not in response to something she'd said, but from himself, reaching toward something in her, the way people reached toward warmth. She did not make much of it. She sat beside him, and she let it be what it was. After a while, he said, The cabin's going to be cold when we get back. Depends how long we're here. The wood stove. I know how to build a fire, she said. I know you do. A pause. I just meant we'd need to... Ethan. Yes. You just said when we get back. She kept her voice neutral, just noting it. He stopped. He'd said it without deciding to say it. The way you said a thing that had already become true somewhere in you before your mouth caught up. She watched him figure that out. He looked at the street for a long moment. I did, he said. You did, she agreed. She didn't push past it. She stood up and said she was going inside, and she went inside, and she let him sit with the thing he'd said, and what it meant, because some things needed to be sat with alone before they became words. Cross's ruling came on the morning of the 3rd day. He read it aloud himself, which she hadn't expected. She'd expected a clerk, a paper, a formal procedure. Instead, Cross came into the waiting room where they sat, and he read it standing up in the same level voice he used for everything. Dunbar's injunction dismissed. Harlan's order vacated, and referred to the territorial bar for investigation of judicial misconduct. The original transaction between Ethan Walker and Royce Dunbar recognized as valid and complete. Abigail Carter legally free of any claim arising from Gerald Carter's debts. Then Cross looked up from the paper and over his glasses. Miss Carter, he said. The men on the South Road. Yes. I've sent a description such as it is to the territorial marshal's office. Whether they find them is uncertain, but Dunbar's name is now in that communication, and that communication is on record. He paused. He'll know I know. That matters, Ethan said. To a man like Dunbar, record is everything. He operates in the spaces that don't get written down. Cross folded the ruling and handed it to Abigail. This gets written down. She took it. It was heavier than paper ought to be, or maybe that was just the weight of what it said. Thank you, she said. Cross waved it off. I've been doing this 12 years. What I did is read documents and apply the law. He looked at her with something that was not quite personal and not quite impersonal. What you did is ride 4 days to a courtroom after someone tried to stop you on the road. He paused. That's a different kind of work. He went back to his chambers. Abigail stood in the waiting room with the ruling in her hands. Ethan stood beside her. She could feel him there, the particular warmth and solidity of him, The way she'd started to feel his presence, without needing to look, the way you stopped consciously registering a sound that had been constant long enough. "It's done," she said. "Yes," he said. She turned to look at him, and he was looking at her, and they were standing close enough that she could see the particular light in his eyes, which was not simple and not easy, and was honest in the way all difficult things were honest when they finally stopped trying to hide. "I want to go home," she said. She said it the way she said everything that mattered, quietly, without decoration, as fact. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I know." "To the cabin," she said, in case that wasn't clear. It was clear. Something moved in his expression, not the almost smile, but the thing behind the almost smile, the thing that had been behind it the whole time. "It was clear when you said it the first time." She exhaled. She folded the ruling and put it in her jacket next to the copy of the Morrow Statement, next to the web filing, next to everything she'd been carrying on this road. Then she turned toward the door. "Are you coming?" she said. He picked up his hat from the chair beside him. "Yes," he said. They walked out of the courthouse together into the late morning, and the road north was ahead of them, and the mountain was 4 days away, and somewhere on the south road, 4 men who'd given no names were making their own calculations about what their employer could still offer them now that the papers were filed, and the judge had ruled, and the thing Dunbar had wanted was simply no longer possible. But Abigail Carter was not thinking about those men. She was thinking about a wood stove, and a shelf of books, and the particular sound of a creek she'd learned to sleep to, and she was thinking about a man who had said "when we get back" without deciding to say it, which was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in longer than she could easily measure. She untied Colt from the post. She mounted. She looked at Ethan already up on his horse, watching her with those steady eyes that had seen her whole from the first moment in the crowd in Caldwell Flats to this courthouse step, and had not looked away. 4 days, she said. 4 days, he agreed. She turned Colt north. They rode. The first day north was quiet in the way things were quiet after a sustained noise stopped. Not peaceful exactly, but empty in a way that took some adjusting to. Abigail rode, and she let the quiet be what it was. She'd learned that from the mountain. You didn't fill silence because you were uncomfortable with it. You let it run until it told you something. What this particular silence told her was that she was tired in a way that went deeper than the road, and the riding, and the 4 days of courtrooms, and river crossings, and men with flat faces and bad intentions. She was tired the way you got tired when you'd been braced for a long time, and the thing you'd been bracing against had finally legitimately stopped. Her body didn't quite know what to do with that yet. Ethan rode beside her, and he was quiet too, and she was grateful for it. He had the particular gift, rare she'd learned, genuinely rare in a person of understanding, when words were a kindness and when they were just noise. They were 2 hours north of the county seat when he said, "Cole." She looked up. The road ahead was empty. "Where?" she said. "Left side, past the bend." He didn't slow his horse. 2 horses, stopped. "How do you know it's Cole?" "I don't. But I know those are horses that have been standing in one place for a while, waiting for something to come up the road." He kept his voice even. "We keep riding. Same pace. Don't look directly." She kept riding. She did not look directly. They came around the bend, and there were indeed 2 horses and 2 men, and one of them was Cole. And the other was a man she didn't recognize, who was thinner than Cole, and had the stillness of someone who'd learned to be patient in unpleasant situations. Cole watched them come without moving. He looked different from the last time, not disheveled exactly, but carrying something. The particular weight of a man who has reported bad news to a bad employer and is now standing in the road with the consequences. "Walker," he said. Ethan pulled up. Abigail stopped beside him. "Cole," Ethan said. "You got your ruling." It wasn't a question. "We did." Cole looked at Abigail. His expression was not the calculating assessment she'd seen in Caldwell Flats. It was something she hadn't expected flatter. Tired. like a man looking at a situation he'd seen through to its end and didn't much like what he found there. "Dunbar's finished," Cole said. "In case you wanted to know. Cross's referral hit the territorial bar yesterday. Harlan's gone by end of week. Without Harlan, Dunbar doesn't have the legal cover he's built the last 10 years. He paused. "Half his business runs through that cover. Without it." He made a small movement with his hand. "Finished." Abigail absorbed this. "Why are you telling us?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "Because I've ridden for bad men before, and I've known the difference and done it anyway." He looked at her steadily. "I'd have taken you off that mountain if I could. I'd have dragged you back to Dunbar, because that was the job." He said it plain without self-pity or excuse. "I want you to know I know what that is. What kind of thing that is." The road was very still. "That's not an apology," Abigail said. "No," he said. "It ain't. It's just a fact said out loud." He picked up his reins. "I'm going north. There's better work up that way." He rode past them without looking back. The thin man followed. Abigail watched them go. "That was unexpected," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "Do you believe him about Dunbar?" "I believe he believes it." He paused. "Whether Dunbar's actually finished depends on how many other arrangements he has that we don't know about. But it's something. It's something," he agreed. She turned her horse north again. "I keep thinking about what Cross said, about record." She rode in silence for a moment. "That's the real thing, isn't it? Not punishment. Not consequence in the immediate sense. Record. The thing that says this happened and it was wrong and somebody looked at it and said so." "Yes," Ethan said. "That's usually the most you get. It's not nothing." "No," he said. "It's not nothing." They rode on. Gerald Carter was waiting at the Pryor Road junction. Of all the things Abigail had expected on this road, her uncle standing next to a hired horse with his hat in his hands was not among them. He looked smaller than she remembered from the day in Caldwell Flats. Diminished, like something that had been inflated by his own schemes and had slowly let out air. She pulled up. Ethan pulled up beside her and said nothing, which she appreciated. Gerald looked up at her, and his face did several things in rapid succession: relief, shame, and the particular expression of a man who has prepared what he wants to say, and is now discovering it doesn't fit the moment as well as he'd thought. "Abigail," he said. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had come west with her mother from Ohio 20 years ago, and had spent 2 decades being the kind of person who was always almost getting somewhere, always almost making good. "Gerald," she said, "I heard about the ruling." He turned his hat in his hands. "I heard Cross dismissed it, that Harlan's being investigated. Yes, I want to—" He stopped, started again. "I know what I did. I know what I put you through. I've known it since that morning." He looked at the road rather than her. "There's nothing I can say that fixes it. I know that." "No," she said. "There isn't." He flinched slightly. "I had debts." "I know about the debts, Gerald." "It wasn't. I didn't think Dunbar would actually—" "Yes, you did," she said quietly. "You knew what he was. Everyone in Caldwell Flats knew what he was." She didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice because she'd learned from her mother that a level voice carried further than a raised one. "You put me on that table anyway." He stood with that. "Yes," he said. "I did. I need you to understand something." She leaned forward slightly in the saddle. "I forgive you, Gerald. Not because you've earned it, and not because it was small. Because you're weak, and you always have been, and you're going to be weak until you die, and carrying hatred for a weak man is a weight I'm not interested in." She paused. "But I'm done. You understand me. Whatever family obligation I came west with, I've paid it. We're even and we're done." Gerald looked at her. His eyes were wet, and she didn't look away from that, and she didn't relent from it either because sentiment and accountability were two different things. "You're going back up the mountain," he said. "Yes." "With him?" He glanced at Ethan. "Yes." Gerald nodded slowly. "Your mother she'd have had something to say about that. She'd have said he was a good man," Abigail said, which is what she said about anyone who actually was one. She straightened in the saddle. "Take care of yourself, Gerald. I mean that. Get somewhere without a card room and start over." She paused. "It's possible. People do it." Gerald put his hat back on. "Take care, Abigail," he said. She rode past him. She did not look back. Ethan rode beside her close enough that she could feel the steadiness of him, and he said nothing for a mile, and then he said, "That was brave." "That was just honest," she said. "Those are the same thing," he said. "More often than people think." She looked at him sideways, and he was looking at the road ahead, and his profile in the afternoon light was. She let herself look at it plainly, because she was past the point of pretending she didn't notice. It was the face of a man she had come to know in the specific way that you knew people when you'd been under pressure with them. When you'd seen what they did when the options ran out. When you'd watched someone choose repeatedly, without calculation, to be the person they were when no one was benefiting from it. She looked at the road again. "I'm going to need a horse of my own," she said. "When we get back, I can't keep borrowing Colt." "I've got 2 others," he said. "The gray mare would suit you." "I'll pay for her." "You don't need to." "I'll pay for her," she said again. "I have money enough from before. I'm not starting with a debt, not even a small one, not even to you." He was quiet for a moment. "The gray mare is yours," he said. "Call it what you need to call it." "I'll call it a fair purchase," she said, "at a price we agree on." "Half what she's worth," he said. "Full price." 3/4. She thought about it. 3/4. She agreed. He made that sound again, the almost laugh. She'd started collecting those, storing them in the same private place she kept the look on his face when she'd crossed the open ground to the tree line in the fading light. They stopped for the night at Haskell's farm again. June Haskell opened the door and looked at them both and said, "Settled then," the way a woman said something she'd already concluded for herself. "Settled," Abigail said. "Good." She stepped back to let them in. "Supper's on." The 9-year-old asked Ethan if he'd fought any more bears since the last time. "No," he said. "Are you going to—" "I'll try to avoid it." She considered this. "What if the bear comes to you? Then I'll negotiate," he said. The 9-year-old nodded with the gravity of a child who found this genuinely reasonable. Abigail ate her supper and listened to the sounds of the Haskell house, the daughters talking over each other. Haskell asking Ethan about the county seat. June's quiet, efficient movement between the stove and the table, and she let it all settle around her like something warm, and she thought, this is what it sounds like. A house with people in it, real people living their actual lives. She'd forgotten what that sounded like. She didn't want to forget again. 3 days north and 2 creek crossings later, they were on the mountain trail. She recognized it before she expected to the particular quality of the air, the way the sounds changed when you were in timber at altitude, the smell of cold stone and pine that she had apparently cataloged somewhere without knowing she was doing it. Her body recognized the mountain before her mind caught up. The gray mare, which she had purchased at 3/4 value receipt, written in Ethan's careful handwriting and countersigned by Abigail herself, moved up the trail with the confidence of a horse that knew where home was. "She's been up here before," Abigail said. "Every summer for 4 years," Ethan said. "She knows this trail better than I do some stretches." "She's got better knees for it too, probably." "Probably." She leaned forward on the uphill stretch, and the mare took it easily, and Abigail thought about the first time she'd ridden up this trail on Colt, gripping with her knees, and not knowing what she was doing, and determined not to show it. 9 days ago. It felt like a different woman. It was in some ways that mattered a different woman. They came over the last rise and the cabin was there. Abigail stopped her horse. She looked at it, the timber walls, the covered porch, the tools in their organized rows, the door that fit its frame. The wood stove chimney. The window where the mountain dark had pressed flat against the glass that first night while she lay on a stranger's bed, and found against all reasonable expectation that she was somewhere with walls that held. She was quiet for a moment. "You all right?" Ethan said. "Yes," she said. "I'm just looking at it." He looked at her, looking at it, and she knew he was doing that without turning to check because she'd started to know when his attention was on her the way you knew weather was coming before you could see the clouds. "It needs work," he said. "The north wall before winter. Chinking's gone soft in 2 places." "I can do chinking," she said. "You've never show me once," she said. "I'll do it." He said nothing for a moment. "I believe you," he said. She rode down to the cabin. Ruth came the next morning. She came the way she always came. Direct, purposeful, carrying something, already having decided what the conversation was going to cover before she arrived. She set a covered dish on the table, and she looked at Abigail, and she looked at Ethan, and she looked at the 2 horses in the pasture, Colt and the gray mare side by side at the fence, and her expression said everything her words didn't. "Cross's ruling came through the prior office," she said. "Webb sent word up the mountain." She sat in one of the chairs. "Harlan's suspended. Dunbar's pulled back to his property and hasn't been to town in 4 days." She paused. "People are talking." "About," Abigail said, "about what it means when a man like Dunbar goes quiet." Ruth poured herself coffee without asking. "In my experience, it means one of 2 things. He's finished or he's thinking." "Cross put his name in a territorial communication," Ethan said. "He can't move without someone noticing now." "That's the optimistic read," Ruth said. "What's the other one?" Ruth turned her coffee cup in her hands. "Men with that much to lose don't always make logical decisions. Sometimes they make angry ones." She looked at Ethan. "I'm not trying to bring alarm. I'm trying to say keep the wire up." "The wire's up," Abigail said. Ruth looked at her. "I checked it this morning," Abigail said. "Both approaches. The gap on the east line that I found before I reset it tighter." Ruth looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Ethan. "Where'd you find her?" Ruth said. "Caldwell Flats," he said. Ruth made the sound that meant approval, which in Ruth was a short exhale through the nose. "You staying?" she said to Abigail, not asking about today or next week, asking the real question. "Yes," Abigail said. Ruth nodded once, like that settled something that had been waiting to be settled. "Good." She stood and put down her cup. "The north wall needs work before first snow. I've got lumber I'm not using. Send Ethan down for it." "I'll come myself," Abigail said. Ruth looked at her one more time. "Yes," she said. "I expect you will." She left the way she'd come. The cabin was quiet after. Ethan looked at Abigail across the table, and she looked back at him, and the morning light was on the table between them, and the coffee was hot, and the wire was set on both approaches, and the gray mare was in the pasture, and somewhere in the valley below, a man named Dunbar was making calculations about what he could still afford to do. But up here in this cabin, in this specific moment, none of that had arrived yet. "What do you want to do today?" Ethan said. She thought about it. "Teach me to read those pencil marks on the map," she said. "The notes you've made. I've been looking at them for days, and I can't parse your system." "It's not a system exactly." "Teach me anyway." She picked up her coffee. "And then I want to ride the east approach. All of it from the wire to the ridge. I want to know it the way you know it." "That'll take most of the day." "Then we start now." He pushed his chair back and stood up and took the map down from the wall and spread it on the table between them, and she leaned forward on her elbows, and he leaned forward on his, and their shoulders were close, but not touching, and he pointed to the first mark and said, "This one means the trail is passable in wet weather." And she said, "Show me the mark for impassable." And he showed her, and she nodded, and they went through the whole map, like that mark by mark, and she asked questions, and he answered them, and she asked better questions, and he answered those, and somewhere in the middle of it he looked up and found her watching him instead of the map. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. She looked back at the map. "What does this mark mean?" He looked where she was pointing. "High water crossing," he said. "Needs a rope line. Do you have one?" "Yes." "Where's ho? Porch. Third hook from the left." "Good." She straightened. "Show me how to set it." He folded the map. He reached for his hat. And that was when they heard the horse on the south trail. Single rider moving slow, the particular pace of someone who wasn't trying to arrive unannounced. They both went still. Ethan moved to the window without being told. She moved to the door, which gave her a different angle, and she looked through the gap in the frame, and what she saw made her breath do something strange. The rider was Gerald Carter. He was alone. He was riding a different horse from the one at the prior junction, a better one, the kind of horse you bought when you'd sold something. He was wearing a clean shirt. He had his hat on straight. He stopped in front of the cabin, and he didn't call out. He just sat there. Ethan looked at Abigail. She looked at him. She opened the door. Gerald looked at her from the saddle. He looked at the cabin behind her. He looked at the porch, and the tools in their rows, and the gray mare in the pasture, and all of it. "I sold the watch," he said. It was the gold watch from their grandfather, the one thing Gerald had never pawned, the one object that had moved through 20 years of bad decisions and somehow survived. "Paid off everything. What was left I sent to the preacher in Caldwell Flats for the family Dunbar shorted on a supply contract last year." He paused. "Wasn't much. It was something." Abigail stood in the doorway. "I'm going north," Gerald said. "Like you said, there's logging work up in the territories. Man I knew in Ohio runs a camp." He turned his hat in his hands, which was apparently a thing he did when he was being honest. "I'm not asking to be forgiven again. I know where we are. I just—" He stopped. "I needed you to know I heard you. What you said at the junction." He looked at her. "I heard it." She stood there for a long moment. "The watch was grandfather's," she said. "I know. He'd have said that was the right thing to do with it." Gerald's jaw moved. "I know that too." She stepped off the porch and walked to his horse, and she looked up at him. This weak man, who was her blood and her burden, and the last living thing that connected her to her mother, and she said, "Right when you get there, let me know you're all right." Gerald Carter blinked. He had not expected that. She could see it move through his face. "I will," he said. "I mean it. A letter. Actual words on paper." "All right." She stepped back. "Then go," she said. "The northern road is clear this time of year." He turned his horse. He rode. She watched him until the south trail took him, and he was gone. She stood there for another moment after. Then she turned back to the cabin. Ethan was on the porch. He'd come out without her hearing him, and he was standing with his arms at his sides and his hat in his hand, and he looked at her with those eyes that never looked somewhere else when they were looking at her. "You gave him a way forward," Ethan said. "I gave him permission to take one that was already there." She climbed the porch steps. He had to sell the watch himself. Ethan looked at her. "You're not going to cry," he said. "Not a question, an observation, the careful kind." "No," she said. "I'm going to go check the east wire, and then you're going to show me the high water crossing." He put his hat on. "All right," he said. She was 3 steps past him when he said, "Abigail." She stopped. She turned. He was standing with his hat brim between his hands, turning it the way Gerald had turned his, which struck her as the most human thing she'd seen him do. And she kept that observation to herself, because this was not the moment for observations. "I meant it," he said. "What I said in the barn, that you had a choice and I wasn't going to put weight on it." He held her gaze. "But I need you to know, because you've said what's true to me, and I owe you the same. I need you to know that if you'd chosen the city, if you'd chosen anything else, it would have cost me something." He paused. "Considerably more than I'd expected to have to pay." The porch was very quiet. She looked at him. She looked at this man who had walked into a crowd for a stranger who had talked about May with his voice even and careful, who had turned his coffee cup in his hands in the dark of a boarding house room and sat at windows all night watching for threats he hoped weren't coming. This man who said hard, true things in quiet voices, and who had said when we get back without deciding to say it. She crossed the porch. She put her hand against his jaw, her thumb at the corner of his mouth, the way you touched something you were allowing yourself to finally acknowledge. He went very still. She felt that stillness move through him, the same stillness as the barn, as the table, as every moment she'd touched him, and found him startled by it, a man who'd spent 11 years making sure no one was close enough to lose. "I know," she said. "It would have cost me something, too." He raised his free hand and covered hers where it rested against his face, his rough fingers over hers, holding her hand in place. Not gripping, just there, the same way she'd set her hand on his wrist that first evening with Ruth at the stove. Present, deliberate, without hurry. She felt it, the careful, enormous weight of what this was for him, what it cost a man who had learned so precisely how to be alone to allow someone to not leave. She didn't move her hand. He turned his head slightly, and his lips pressed against her palm once, and she held very still herself, because she understood that this was not a small thing, and she was not going to treat it as one. Then he lowered their joined hands. He looked at her. "The East Wire," he said. "The East Wire," she agreed. She stepped back. He settled his hat on his head. She went down the porch steps first, and he followed, and they walked out toward the east approach together, side by side on the ground. They both knew in the mountain summer that had not yet broken in the particular quiet of two people who have been through enough together that words have become optional and silence has become something to inhabit rather than fill. The wire was intact. She found a section that had gone slightly slack, the third stake from the timber edge, and she tightened it herself while he watched, and she did it correctly, and he didn't say anything, and she took that silence as the highest available praise. They rode the east approach from the wire to the ridge, and he showed her every landmark, and she memorized each one and asked precise questions, and he answered them precisely, and by the time they turned back toward the cabin, the afternoon had gotten long and golden, and the mountain held them the way mountains hold things that belong on them. On the ridge, she stopped her horse, and she looked out at the range running north and south, at the timber below, at the thin line of the South Trail, where Gerald Carter was making his way toward a life he might actually manage to live this time. "It's big," she said. "Yes," Ethan said, "but you know all of it." "Most of it." He looked out too. "There's a valley 2 days northeast I've only been to twice. I've been meaning to map it." She looked at him. "We could go." He looked at her. "It's rough terrain." "I know rough terrain." "It's 3 days out, 3 days back." "I know how to count," she said. The almost smile, the real thing behind it. "After the north wall," he said. "After the north wall," she agreed. She turned her horse back toward the cabin, and the gray mare moved under her with the easy confidence of an animal that knew where it was going, and the evening came down around the mountain the way evenings did at altitude, fast and clean and cold at the edges, and the wood stove would need lighting when they got back, and there was lumber to arrange from Ruth's place, and a map to finish learning, and a high water crossing that still needed to be demonstrated. There was enough to do for a very long time. That she understood was the point. She rode into the last of the light with a man who had found her in a crowd and had not looked away since on a mountain that had known her for 9 days and already felt like it was learning her name toward a cabin with walls that had been built to last. And she was not rescued, and she was not settled, and she was not the sum of any debt that anyone had ever tried to place on her. She was Abigail Carter, and she had chosen this, and she rode forward into it with both eyes open and her chin exactly where it had always been. That was how it was, and that was how it stayed. And nothing that came after ever changed the truth of what she had decided on that mountain, in that summer, with that man, that a life claimed freely was worth every road it cost to get there.